We've all heard of filling someone else's bucket, but what about filling our own? Joining me today is Justin Fraser, Community Wealth Advisor with Meridian Credit Union, and he has a unique approach to building and maintaining our personal wealth, even in light of COVID-19. Welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you have an approach to saving and sort of maintaining our own personal wealth that I think a lot of people will really understand. So start to explain to me what you mean by three buckets.
Right. So especially during these times when it seems so unprecedented, seems to be the word that keeps on going around. When people look at their own finances, we have to make sure that we have a comfortability that yes, some parts are affected and it isn't too light to take, but there are parts of your money that you're not going to be necessarily using for today or tomorrow or even 7 years from now. So what we try to do is try to compartmentalize three different buckets and to actually visualize and actually know, okay, this bucket of my money is short-term money. I'm going to need access to this, so I need it very safe. And then there's money that you're going to be using in the longer term, 7+ years, that could take the fluctuations or events like COVID. So if we do split our money up, then we can protect our money in case of circumstances like today.
Okay, so we have one bucket that's short term, one bucket that's long term. What's that third bucket?
And then there's a third bucket, right? So, and for those that you can see me, basically what we do is we have the three buckets, and in the first bucket, and for those who can see my horrible drawing, I was very good at math, not so good in the arts. But in the first bucket, we have our safety. This is basically 0 to 2 years if you were in retirement stance, but we want this bucket for safety and safety only. So things like cash, things like very short-term offer, GIC offers, that type of thing that are less than 1 year. If you want that money, you go and you spend it, but there's no fluctuations. It's immediately accessible. So the first bucket is safety. The second bucket is income. So in the income bucket, it's not as accessible, but it's still guaranteed. So these are things like GICs that are guaranteed for a specified amount of time. So you lose liquidity or be able to access the money, but where you gain is you get higher interest. So we focus on getting higher interest, but still security. This is basically 3 to year 7. Then what we have is our final bucket. And our final bucket is where we're trying to get growth. So in the growth, that's where we think of our stocks or our mutual funds or our things that are fluctuating in value. So those are going to give us the most amount of money over the long period, but they go through times like today where they fluctuate in value. So people get scared or excited and it can move the value up and down.
And it's important, I'm guessing that it's important to leave that growth bucket alone.
Exactly. So if we leave this growth bucket alone, then we can ride the waves and try to make sure that we get the most amount of money to justify the ups and downs. So this bucket is where you're going to get the most amount of return on your money, but sometimes they go through that periods of fluctuation. So if we set it up that you have 7 years of potential income, say in retirement, or if you set up that you have multiple sources of buckets, if something comes up like job loss or a COVID-19 type situation, then we don't need to access this money until we've actually gone through this, and then finally this. So this eliminates the risk of needing to access your money when it's not necessarily worth as much as it should be worth.
And as time moves on, as we move through each of these stages, the growth bucket eventually becomes the income and safety buckets. Is this correct? Sort of a spillover effect?
Right. So when you are finally starting to draw your income, or even in a situation where you are in an emergency situation and you need to draw from this, you draw from the first bucket. And then the second bucket as those GICs mature and as those income comes in, this one replenishes the bucket where you took out from here. And then the growth on the third bucket, we basically turn the tap on there, and then the growth in the third bucket, we basically have the funnel dripping into the second bucket. So those will purchase new GICs, and then the GICs, the interest and the ones that come maturity, drip down to the first bucket, the savings account, and then that will pay out your yearly income for, say, a retiree. So if we do this, and say COVID-19 does happen, and your final bucket is now worth, 10% less, and you're thinking, I have lost 10%. Well, we haven't lost it unless we sold it. So all we should do is we turn that tap off. We turn that guy off. So if we turn the tap off on the third bucket for a retiree, we still have 7 years of income that we don't necessarily have to dabble into the stuff that has dropped down in value to allow it to come back, to allow prices to normalize, and for to be able to replenish the other buckets.
So you say you're not a very good artist, but I have to say this little drawing that you are sharing with me on the video for this is actually really making sense, and it seems so easy. Still, I feel like probably the best thing is to get in and talk to an advisor to help set up what you need to put in each bucket, because again, what you invest in varies for each bucket, correct?
Very much. And the biggest thing is that the amount that we draw out of the first bucket, or how much each person needs in each bucket, varies on a lot of things, like how much pension they're going to get, or what kind of job they have, or what kind of lifestyle they have. I once had a person who was used to living off of $700 a month. And that seems, there's no way I'd be able to do that. I mean, rent alone in Barrie for a 2-bedroom apartment is like $1,500. So somehow she was able to get $700 a month as her income. So her buckets are very, very small. There's other people, I've showed them that, their $300,000 lifestyle isn't really necessarily going to be able to be maintained. So they need much, much larger buckets depending on their lifestyles that they want or need to continue on. So the buckets are very much different. And if you sit with an advisor, they can try to show you how much you're going to actually need in each bucket to make sure that you live the same lifestyle that you want to maintain.
So I guess that's the first step then, is establishing sort of what kind of lifestyle, and being realistic about that would be the first step in establishing how big each bucket needs to be. Also, sort of when we're planning, most people are planning this pre-retirement. How many, is there sort of like a years people should be planning this out, or can they start later?
The old rule of thumb is always invest yesterday. That's always the best day to invest. And the earlier you start, the more of a cushion you can build. So basically our money can be compounding kind of like a snowball. And if we start earlier, it's a lot easier to build yourself a nice nest egg. It's very much still a possibility later on, but your buckets might just be more, there might be a more realistic constraint based on the time frame that you have to grow your buckets. So the earlier you start, the easier it is, and the better chances you have to maintain your buckets going forward. But it's definitely, it's never too late, and always to see an advisor to at least get your head out of the sand and to see the realities of what your current situation is.
Well, I've really loved how you explain this. I wish you would actually take this into the schools. It's brilliant, and it's so easy to understand how this works. But if people want to get in touch with you right now, what's the best way for them to do that in light of COVID? Are you still seeing people in branches? How are you working that now?
Well, actually, just very similar to what we're doing right now. I'm able to still see people via Skype. We do have, the branches are open, and there are people seeing members, with extra precaution taking place. I myself currently am officially my first day on paternity leave, so I'll be not seeing anyone. Thank you. So little Kaya has starred in some of my videos that I've been able to try to keep in touch with the branches during this time. But so if anyone does want to look at that video, we can definitely share that. But we are trying to make business as usual as much as unusual as it is. And what I've been telling people is that as much as this is an unusual circumstance that we're dealing with in the stock market world and in the business world, it's a very normal part of the economic cycle being, a downturn or a correction. Like this is very something expected. And again, so if you do sit with an advisor and do something like this, then you're preparing for this. You have a plan and action to take advantage of this.
Well,
And
thank
the
you very
school
much
thing,
for.
I'm totally agreeing. The school thing, I learned, I got fortunate enough to learn from a teacher who brought this completely out of his spectrum on what he was trying to teach. But he taught us things like this, and I forever was passionate about that. So I'm trying, and hopefully, we can get out to the school system much more on teaching people some basics.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Justin. This was incredibly enlightening. I always feel better after I speak with somebody at Meridian. We'll look forward to having you back another time.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Candace.